Something terrifying is happening in North Carolina. In just 2 years, more than 31 homes along the Outer Banks have collapsed into the Atlantic Ocean. 19 of those homes disappeared this year alone as powerful waves tore through the coastline and destroyed their foundations. In some areas, the shoreline retreated by more than 140 feet during a single erosion event, a rate researchers describe as almost unprecedented for this region. And now everything is accelerating. A recent winter storm with winds exceeding 60 miles per hour destroyed 4 beachfront homes within only a few days. After the storm passed, all that remained were shattered wooden beams, broken pilings, and debris drifting along the cold Atlantic shoreline. More than 30,000 Americans are now living in what many experts consider a growing danger zone. It's especially as Highway 12, the only evacuation route connecting parts of the Outer Banks to the mainland, continues to flood during storms and high tides. And the most frightening part is this: nobody knows which house will disappear next. Subscribe for the latest updates on extreme weather, coastal disasters, and the environmental changes rapidly reshaping parts of the United States. The Outer Banks may look peaceful from the air, but beneath the beauty, the coastline is slowly falling apart. These barrier islands stretch along nearly 200 miles of North Carolina's coast, acting as a natural shield between the Atlantic Ocean and the mainland. In some areas, the land is so narrow that there is less than half a mile separating ocean waves from the water behind the islands. And now, that thin strip of land is shrinking fast. Scientists say the Outer Banks are being squeezed from both directions at the same time. Powerful Atlantic waves continue eating away the eastern shoreline, while rising water levels and flooding pressure build from the west. With every storm, more sand disappears, more dunes collapse, and the islands become weaker. In recent years, entire sections of beach have vanished after only a few weeks of rough weather. Some residents say the shoreline now sits dangerously close to homes that once stood safely far from the water. The changes are becoming impossible to ignore. Roads flood more often. Emergency crews respond to collapsing structures more frequently. And families, who once believed they had found a safe coastal paradise, are beginning to realize the ocean is slowly reclaiming the land beneath them. For many people living here, the fear is no longer about the next storm. It is about whether the Outer Banks can survive the future at all. Residents along the Outer Banks say the weather feels different now. Storms that once arrived only a few times each year are becoming more frequent, more aggressive, and far more destructive. What frightened many families recently was not a major hurricane, but a powerful winter storm that rapidly turned the coastline into a disaster zone. Its winds exceeding 60 miles per hour slammed into the islands, while massive waves pushed deep into the beaches. In only a matter of days, 4 beachfront homes collapsed into the Atlantic Ocean. Some were torn apart piece by piece before finally disappearing beneath the surf. After the storm passed, the shoreline looked unrecognizable. Broken wooden beams, furniture, insulation, and shattered debris floated through the water as emergency crews blocked off dangerous sections of the beach. Residents stood helplessly watching waves crash into homes that were still standing, wondering if they would survive another night. Researchers say storms are now stripping away huge amounts of sand in very short periods of time. In some places, beaches lost more than 100 feet of shoreline after only a few weeks of rough weather. And many experts fear this is becoming the new normal, because each new storm is no longer just damaging the Outer Banks. It is accelerating their collapse. What makes this disaster even more disturbing is that scientists warned about it years ago. Back in 2012, North Carolina became the only state in America to pass a law limiting the use of accelerated sea level rise projections in coastal planning. The law, known as House Bill 819, prevented state agencies from fully using scientific forecasts that showed the ocean could rise much faster than previously expected. At the time, many researchers strongly criticized the decision. They warned that barrier islands like the Outer Banks were already extremely vulnerable to erosion, rising seas, and stronger coastal storms. But despite those warnings, development continued. New homes were built in areas scientists believed could eventually become uninhabitable. Today, many of those same homes are either collapsing into the Atlantic or standing only feet away from destruction. For some residents, the anger is growing. People who invested their savings into beachfront property now feel trapped. Insurance companies are pulling back coverage. Property values are becoming unstable. And homeowners are realizing that the risks may have been far greater than they were ever told. What began as a political debate years ago is now unfolding as a real-world crisis along the coastline. And the most painful reality is this: the ocean did not suddenly change overnight. The warnings were there all along. But while the waves kept moving closer, many leaders chose to look the other way until the collapse became impossible to ignore. For many families living on the Outer Banks, leaving is no longer simple. Some homeowners have spent years watching the shoreline creep closer to their properties, storm after storm, season after season. What once felt like a dream home near the ocean is now becoming a financial nightmare. Many cannot sell their houses anymore. Buyers are disappearing, insurance companies are refusing coverage, and banks are becoming increasingly cautious about coastal properties, facing severe erosion risks. Some residents say they feel completely trapped, unable to stay safely, but also unable to leave. A few families have attempted drastic solutions. Some spent more than $100,000 moving entire homes inland, slowly dragging the structures away from the collapsing shoreline. But not everyone can afford that kind of relocation. Others can only wait and hope the next storm changes direction before it reaches their foundation. The emotional toll is becoming just as severe as the physical damage. Residents describe waking up during storms to the sound of waves crashing beneath their homes, unsure whether the ground below them will still exist by morning. And with every new collapse shared across social media and news reports, fear continues spreading through these small coastal communities. Because now, many families are realizing something heartbreaking. The ocean is no longer near their homes. It is already underneath them. What is happening to the Outer Banks is not just ordinary beach erosion. According to coastal geologists, these barrier islands survive by doing one important thing: moving inland over time. It's as sea levels rise and storms push sand across the islands, the land naturally shifts westward. It is how these fragile coastlines have survived for thousands of years. But now, that movement is being blocked. Homes, roads, power lines, and other infrastructure have locked large parts of the islands in place. Instead of slowly migrating inland, it's the Outer Banks are being squeezed tighter and tighter between the Atlantic Ocean and rising water behind them. And scientists say that changes everything. When waves crash over the beaches during storms, the islands can no longer rebuild naturally the way they once did. Sand disappears faster than it can recover. Dunes collapse. Flooding becomes more severe. And each year, the coastline becomes thinner and weaker. One coastal expert explained it in a chilling way. Barrier islands are supposed to move. When you stop them from moving, you slowly destroy them. That is why many researchers now fear the Outer Banks may be entering a phase where parts of the islands can no longer recover naturally. Not because one storm destroyed them overnight, but because decades of pressure are finally catching up all at once. Local officials have been fighting to save the Outer Banks for years. The main strategy has been beach nourishment, a costly process where massive amounts of sand are pumped from offshore back onto the beaches to slow erosion and protect homes. On paper, it sounds like a solution. But in reality, the ocean keeps taking the sand back faster than many expected. In 2022, Dare County spent around $18 million replenishing nearly 3 miles of shoreline near Buxton. Today, much of that sand is already gone. Now, even larger projects are being planned, including tens of millions more for additional nourishment along vulnerable sections of the coast. But many experts warn these efforts may only buy a small amount of time before the next major storm washes everything away again. And there is another growing concern. Federal disaster funding remains uncertain, raising fears that local communities could eventually struggle to afford these emergency coastal defenses. For many residents, this is becoming difficult to watch. Every new project brings temporary hope, yet each storm seems to erase that progress within days. And as the Atlantic continues rising, more people are starting to ask a painful question. How long can anyone keep rebuilding a coastline that nature is determined to erase? The most frightening part of this crisis is that the ocean is not slowing down. Federal tide gauge data shows sea levels near the Outer Banks have already risen about 8 inches over the past 30 years. Scientists now project another 15 to 22 inches of rise could happen by the year 2050. That may not sound dramatic at first, but along fragile barrier islands, even a few extra inches can completely change how storms behave. Higher sea levels allow waves to travel farther inland, destroy dunes more easily, and flood roads and homes during storms that once caused only minor damage. And researchers warn the process is accelerating. Many scientists say sea level rise is no longer happening in a slow, predictable pattern. Warmer oceans, changing storm systems, and increased coastal flooding are combining to place enormous pressure on already unstable shorelines. Residents are beginning to notice the difference themselves. Flooding now happens during routine high tides in some areas. Beaches that families walked on only a few years ago are shrinking rapidly. And after every storm, more homes appear dangerously close to the water. For people living along the Outer Banks, the fear is growing because the numbers no longer feel distant or theoretical. They are becoming visible in real time. The Atlantic Ocean is moving closer month after month, and many experts believe the coastline is running out of time to adapt. For thousands of people living on the Outer Banks, Highway 12 is more than just a road. It is the only connection between many coastal communities and the mainland. Families rely on it for food deliveries, medical care, school transportation, emergency services, and evacuation during hurricanes. But now, that lifeline is becoming increasingly vulnerable. During strong storms and high tides, ocean water regularly crashes over sections of the highway, covering the pavement with sand, debris, and flooding. In some areas, the Atlantic is moving dangerously close to the road itself. Residents say closures are happening more often than ever before. And every time the highway shuts down, entire communities can become isolated within hours. Emergency officials are especially worried because hurricane season begins on June 1st. A single major storm striking Cape Hatteras could wash away sections of protective sand, damage homes, and severely disrupt Highway 12 all at once. For many people living here, the fear is no longer just about losing property. It is about losing the only safe way out when the next disaster arrives. Experts fear the Outer Banks could be approaching a breaking point. If a major hurricane were to make direct landfall near Cape Hatteras, the damage could unfold far faster than many residents are prepared for. Powerful storm surge, massive Atlantic waves, and extreme coastal flooding could erase newly restored beaches within hours. And once those protective sand barriers disappear, entire neighborhoods could suddenly become exposed. Researchers warn that dozens of already vulnerable homes may not survive another major storm season. Some structures are now standing only feet away from collapsing shorelines, with waves striking dangerously close to their foundations during routine coastal storms. At the same time, Highway 12, the only evacuation route for many communities, could become flooded or severely damaged, trapping residents while emergency crews struggle to respond. That possibility is becoming harder to ignore. Many families living along the coastline now spend every hurricane season wondering whether the next storm could be the one that changes everything permanently. Because this crisis is no longer unfolding slowly in the distant future. People are already watching beaches disappear, homes collapse, and roads flood in real time. And the question facing the Outer Banks is becoming more urgent every year. At what point does a coastline stop being safe to live on at all? What is happening along the Outer Banks is no longer being viewed as an isolated coastal problem. Scientists say many parts of the United States are facing similar pressures from rising sea levels, stronger coastal storms, and accelerating shoreline erosion. From Florida to Louisiana and parts of the East Coast, communities are beginning to experience the same warning signs now visible in North Carolina. Flooding is becoming more frequent. Beaches are shrinking faster, insurance costs are rising, and entire neighborhoods near the coast are starting to question how long they can continue rebuilding after every major storm. That is why many researchers are paying close attention to the Outer Banks. Not just because homes are collapsing into the Atlantic, but because these barrier islands may be showing what the future could look like for vulnerable coastlines across America. For decades, many people believed coastal erosion was a slow process that would unfold over generations. But the scenes now coming from North Carolina are changing that perception rapidly. Because for thousands of residents, the future no longer feels far away. It already feels like it has arrived at their doorstep with every rising tide and every incoming storm. Tonight, the waves are still crashing against the Outer Banks. Some homes remain standing for now, their wooden pilings exposed the ocean inches closer beneath them. Its pieces of coastline that existed only months ago have already disappeared into the Atlantic. And according to researchers, the shoreline continues retreating with every major storm that passes through the region. For many residents, the fear is no longer about whether the coastline is changing. It is about how much time is left before another collapse happens again. Because right now, the Atlantic Ocean is still moving closer to the next house, the next road, and the next community along the Outer Banks. And many experts believe this story is far from over. What do you think will happen to the Outer Banks over the next few years? Let us know in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel for more updates on extreme weather, coastal disasters, earthquakes, and major environmental changes happening across the United States and around the world before they become even more dangerous.